Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Still with you and our edition of Arab Affairs, and still discussing the latest situation in Lebanon with the parliamentary elections that have begun in the country. And we're now delighted to be joined over the telephone by His Excellency Ambassador Hussein Haridi, former Assistant Foreign Minister. It's a very good afternoon to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Good afternoon to you, madam.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us this afternoon. Mr. Ambassador, of course, we are talking about 128 seats of the Parliament of Lebanon, 65 seats needed for a majority for the Lebanese Parliament. How important do you see these elections, Your Excellency?
Well, these elections are very important, not only from the point of view of the Lebanese people, but from the standpoint of the international community.
Yes.
Taking into account that this is the first general election that have taken place since the end of 2018, when the Lebanese people took to the street and
protest.
Demanded a complete change in the political status quo in Lebanon. So the international community is waiting for the results to see who would represent the Lebanese people, and whether those representatives, those elected representatives, would carry out the aspirations of the Lebanese people. And this is the first point that I want to underline. The second point is that we hope, we wish that these elections would put Lebanon on the way of political reform, economic reform, financial reform, because the economic situation in Lebanon is very critical. So let's hope, madam, that these elections would be a turning point in the history of Lebanon.
Absolutely. Mr. Ambassador, could you tell me a bit more about, the situation in Lebanon on the ground at the moment?
Well, as I said, madam, from a political point of view, there is polarization economically and financially. Lebanon is in dire straits. The economic situation is very, 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 very bad, and these elections hopefully would really contribute in improving the economic lot of the majority of Lebanese people. Madam.
Indeed. Mr. Ambassador, how do you see the Lebanon port, the Beirut port explosion really aggravating the situation both politically and economically in Lebanon, sir?
The explosion?
Yes.
Well, yeah, the explosion of August 2020.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador.
Okay. Well, so far, the investigations have led nowhere. No one knows who is responsible, who would take the responsibility of the explosion. And it's very complicated, madam. The situation, the overall situation in Lebanon lacks transparency. And let's hope that the new members of the National Assembly in Lebanon would really be up to the task of reaching and achieving transparency, and ensure accountability. Those who have led Lebanon to this situation should be held accountable.
Indeed. Now, Mr. Ambassador, let me ask you, how do you see the influence of, external powers in the stability of Lebanon?
Well, Lebanon, madam, has become a battleground for regional powers. They are competing on Lebanese soil for influence, and of course, and Lebanon, the Lebanese people and the Lebanese political class should shield Lebanon from such an interference in the domestic affairs of Lebanon, because, as a matter of fact, the foreign intervention in Lebanese politics is a very aggravating factor in the situation in Lebanon.
Absolutely. Right. Mr. Ambassador, you know, lots of opposition groups have emerged over the years, but they failed really to unite or become one united front in the face of the political elite, which is, as you mentioned, you know, responsible for how far the situation has worsened in Lebanon. Why do you think that they have not managed to unite as a political entity to serve Lebanon?
Well, there are various reasons to explain the lack of unity among the various political forces in Lebanon. I guess my personal opinion, my personal take on this point, Madam,
yes,
is that the regional and the international context has aggravated the situation, the political situation, and relations among various political parties and forces in Lebanon. If the Lebanese could reduce the role and the impact of foreign intervention in their domestic politics, I guess that would be normal. It's normal that when, politically speaking, you have a party in power, you have opposition, you have various differences of opinion. This is not the problem. The problem is that they cannot come to an agreement on how they cannot reach a consensus, a political consensus, to how to lead their country. Many years ago, many decades ago, they were able. There was consensus, political consensus, and Lebanon was a oasis of freedom of speech, of democracy in the Arab world, to the extent that it was called the Switzerland of the Arab world.
Yes.
But now, after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, things and the creation of Hezbollah, Lebanese Hezbollah, the situation has become, these two developments have rendered the political consensus almost mute, and it's difficult now to reach political consensus. Let's hope that the Lebanese, with these elections, would turn the page. Let's hope, Madam.
Indeed, Mr. Ambassador.
It remains to be seen.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Ambassador, aside from the parliamentary elections, etc., what, in your opinion, does Lebanon need to really overcome the existing stalemate? As you said, they're struggling for many years now.
Well, would you mind repeating the question?
Sure, Mr. Ambassador. I'm saying, aside from the parliamentary elections that are currently being held in Lebanon, what else does Lebanon need politically to overcome the existing stalemate in the country, which, as you said, they are struggling to for many years now? Well,
it's easier said than done. It would be easier said than done.
Yes.
Well, it needs leadership. A new political leadership committed to not only political reform, but to economic reform, to transparency, to accountability. That is, in other words, Lebanon, we have seen a revolution on the streets of Lebanon,
yes,
at the end of 2018. Now, Lebanon needs to translate this revolution on the streets into a revolution, into the laws that govern the politics, the economy, and the finances of Lebanon. All depends on whether Lebanon would see a committed leadership, the emergence of a committed leadership that will be really would promise the Lebanese people to improve the lot of the majority by introducing fundamental political and economic reforms.
Indeed.
In other words, if the situation would remain the same, I wonder if we could expect really an improvement on the present day situation in Lebanon.
Mr. Ambassador, let me move now to the role of, Lebanon's neighbors and Arab brotherly nations. What role did they play before, and what role can they play now with the current situation in Lebanon?
Right now, I guess the major contribution on the Arab side for the stabilization of Lebanon is mainly in the economic and financial sphere. Whether the rich Arab, the wealthy Arab countries are willing at the present stage to stand by Lebanon on these two fronts, the economic and the financial, well, it remains to be seen, madam. Politically speaking, I doubt if there is anything that Arab countries can do in Lebanon. Most Arab countries don't want to intervene in domestic politics of Lebanon, because they have realized that foreign interference in the political affairs of Lebanon has become a complicating factor and has become a stumbling block towards the stability, political and economic stability of Lebanon. So I would presume that the Arab countries are waiting for the results of the parliamentary elections, hoping and praying that these elections would put new members in the National Assembly, in the Lebanese National Assembly, members really committed to realize the revolutionary aspirations of the Lebanese people that we all had seen back in 2018.
Indeed. Mr. Ambassador, the Lebanese economy, as you mentioned, has really bared the brunt of the unrest in the country. Their currency has deteriorated significantly over the last few years. And of course, their relationship economically with the region and internationally has also struggled. What role did or can international financial institutions like the World Bank or the IMF, etc., play in assisting Lebanon to come out of its economic recession?
Well, as you may know, madam, there are ongoing negotiations between a technical team representing the Lebanese government and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, to reach a program, a support program on the part of the IMF up to, as I understand, up to 11 billion US dollars. But of course, the IMF wants, they have certain conditionality. They have a conditionality before, and they want to make sure that the new Lebanese government would really be committed to implement the reform program that would be signed between the IMF and the Lebanese government, the new Lebanese government, because now everything, in light of these elections, I would presume that everything is on hold right now, waiting to see the results and to see the formation of a new Lebanese government. It will be incumbent, assuming that the elections would really make it easier to form a new Lebanese government, it would be incumbent on the next government in Lebanon to sign such a deal. If for one reason or another, they don't sign this agreement, if they don't sign such agreement with the IMF, I doubt very much if the economic and financial situation in Lebanon would see any improvement in the near medium term.
As you said, Mr. Ambassador, international financial organizations are waiting for a solid government to negotiate with and to reach an agreement with.
Yes, of course. Of course, the IMF wants to sign an agreement with a representative government and a strong government that has the political will to carry out the program that would be agreed upon between the two sides, madam.
Indeed. Mr. Ambassador, let me ask you that this is the first parliamentary election for Lebanon in which expatriates are actually voting in, and we are seeing that voting has already begun and tomorrow continues with the Lebanese expatriates. How important is their contribution and participation, especially because many Lebanese citizens left the country after all the deterioration politically and economically there?
Well, historically speaking, the Lebanese expatriates are a very influential group in Lebanese politics. They are very, some of them are very rich, and in fact, the money that they transferred, the foreign currency that they transferred in the last 4 years to Lebanon is considered to be a factor that has ensured a certain kind of stability and liquidity in Lebanon. So, of course, the Lebanese community abroad are influential, and of course, and I would assume that their representatives in the parliament would have a say in the future of Lebanon.
Absolutely right. So Your Excellency, Ambassador Hussein Haridi, former assistant to the Foreign Minister, I'd like to thank you very, very much, Your Excellency, for your time and your insight and for joining us on today's edition of Arab Affairs. And of course, today we covered the latest developments in Lebanon and the Lebanese parliamentary election for 2022, which will be ongoing, started and is ongoing. And of course, a very important development for Lebanon as a country in order to strengthen it politically as well as economically, helping it out of its economic slum and political stalemate. And that's all the time we have for today's episode of Arab Affairs. We do hope you have enjoyed it. You were in the company of myself and Meher. Many thanks for watching.